Sara Keen, a senior research scientist at Earth Species Project, who will share an in-depth look at how cutting-edge AI is unlocking the secrets of animal communication and paving the way for a renewed relationship between humans and the rest of nature. As an expert in bioacoustics and machine learning, Sara will provide a behind-the-scenes look at the groundbreaking work happening at ESP, where a new AI approach is being applied to the massive challenge of decoding the languages of the natural world. She'll explore the progress made over the past year, highlighting major advancements like NatureLM-audio, a foundation model designed to accelerate bioacoustics research, much like GPT-4 transformed human language processing. She'll also present a demo of the latest tech, illustrating how these tools can analyze vast amounts of animal vocalization data across species. And at the end of her presentation, we'll do a Q&A facilitated by SwapGuard. Please give a warm welcome to Sara.
Thank you so much. So it's great to be here, and I'm going to talk a bit about our current work at Earth Species Project and describe some of our ongoing projects, and like was just said, I'll be doing a demo at the end. So Earth Species Project, or ESP, is an impact organization that was founded in 2017. This is our founding team right here. And so we develop AI models and tools that can be used to decode and amplify the voices and the intelligence of other species. So our vision is a future where humans and other species have an integrated relationship that would allow for the diversity of life on Earth to thrive. And so our hope is that by expanding human understanding of the world around us, people will be more inspired to protect and connect with other species. And we also hope that our findings will support conservation efforts and could be informative for policymakers too. So to step back and think about this problem, this puzzle we're trying to solve, it's actually many different puzzles that we're solving in parallel because communication systems are as diverse as life on this planet. So to start off, I'm just going to give a few examples of communication in certain species, discoveries that have been made recently, just to give examples of the kind of data we're working with. So these are bottlenose dolphins, and this species is known to use names. So the way their naming convention works is every dolphin has a unique whistle that is unlike the whistle of any other dolphin. It's called their signature whistle. And if an individual wants to address a certain dolphin, they will mimic that dolphin's whistle. And so it's almost like calling out someone's name to get their attention. And in this way, they can direct information at certain members of their pod, which is really useful because they have these very complex fusion social systems. And just 2 years ago, it was found that when mother dolphins are addressing their calves, they use these signature whistles, but they adjust the tone of their voice, and so their frequency goes higher and is more variable. And this is analogous to what humans do across cultures. That's called motherese. So when humans talk to babies, especially mothers, they tend to adjust their voices in a similar way. Elephants are another species that has been found to use names. This was just published last year. Their naming convention works slightly differently, where the name of the receiver is embedded within the structure of their calls. So this example and the last one I gave about dolphins were just published in the last 2 years, so we're really on the threshold of our knowledge here and like pushing the boundaries of what we know in real time. One other interesting fact is that elephants use these very low frequency rumbles to communicate. They're so low that the pitch is 10 or 12 hertz beneath our human hearing limitations. And this wasn't known by Western science until the 80s, when a researcher named Katie Payne was at a zoo in Oregon. And she was in front of an elephant exhibit, and she felt vibrations and hypothesized that the elephants were creating them herself. And then similarly with the dolphins, they go above our human hearing range. So just to know when another animal is communicating is sometimes challenging because of our human perceptual limitations. So that's one of the first challenges here, is overcoming that barrier. Another challenge in studying animal signals is collecting the data itself. So this is a drone shot of our collaborator, Ari Friedlander, who's a professor at UC Santa Cruz. And what's happening here is there are 3 researchers in a boat in front of a humpback whale. They have a long stick. On the end of that stick is a biologger, so a microcontroller with a lot of sensors, and it has a suction cup. And they want to place that on the back of the whale, and this is a biologger tag that can then collect data. It'll stay on for a few hours and eventually fall off, and the researchers can retrieve it and get all of the data. Here's a video from the researcher's perspective. So that doesn't work every time. These are hard to get on, and every single data point here is hard-earned. We have to do a boat expedition to put these tags on. Here's a video showing what it looks like from the tag's perspective. So this is on the back of a whale. You can see the whale's skin. It's moving around. You could see some fish. There's another whale above it. And this biologger is continuously recording things like the body position in 3 dimensions, depth, as well as audio and video. So when we do manage to collect data, we're getting a huge amount of it, and the challenge then becomes, how do we sift through it and find meaningful patterns? Or how do we even know where the salient information is? So we're hoping that this is where AI can help us. And specifically what we're trying to do is get at meaning. What do animal signals mean? So at ESP, we have developed a conceptual framework for how we want to approach this problem. And this is a figure from a publication that some of our research team did with collaborators, and it came out a few years ago. And so the idea is, moving from left to right at a very high level, we want to collect data that is multimodal. We're focused primarily on vocalizations right now, but we want to be able to pair those vocalizations with contextual information, like how is the animal moving, who is it interacting with, what is the setting. Feed that multimodal data into a model that is then able to make correlations, so matching signal types with context. And that's the high-level approach for helping us start to get at this decode puzzle. And since we were founded in 2017, one of the immediate realizations that the researchers had is it's really hard to measure progress or your abilities of an AI model if you don't have benchmarks. So we need a yardstick to know how well we're doing. And unlike human speech data, where we have a whole internet worth to use, animal data is very scarce. So one of the first major efforts of our team has been to create benchmarks of animal sounds. So this one was presented at ICAST 2 years ago. It's called BEANS, the benchmark of animal sounds is the acronym. And so this is collecting data from whales, bats, birds, dogs, many different species, and has a few different machine learning tasks like classification and detection. And once we assembled this benchmark, we were able to start testing some of the top-line models to look at their performance and use those metrics as like the scores that we're trying to beat when it comes to developing our own models. So the first model that we developed for working with animal sounds is called AVIS. This is an encoder model, and it's based on the Hubert architecture. So this was created for human speech processing. And one huge advantage of Hubert is that it is self-supervised. So what this means is we are able to feed in unlabeled data, and the model itself is able to find structure and create these acoustic units. So this is a big advantage because as hard as it is to get animal data, it's even more effort to start labeling it. And humans might not even have the correct labels, so we're just guessing ourselves some of the time. So this model is able to do that. And another important point is that we are taking advantage of transfer learning abilities. So the model was initially trained on some of these famous human speech data sets or environmental sounds, audio set and VGG sound, and then was fine-tuned with animal signals. And so from that, we're able to calculate our embeddings from any audio sample that is fed into the model. Every sample will fall into an embedding space, and if we look at where the samples fall, we can create clusters where all of the same species are located within the same region in that space. So this was our first model, and it was also the first ever foundation model for animal sounds. So to give an example of using this, after I joined ESP 2 years ago, one of my first projects was to apply this AVs model in studying animal sounds. And I worked with a professor here at Berkeley named Damien Elias and his graduate student Lin Yan. And so Damien has dedicated his career to studying spider communication and insect communication, and he has a lab here at Berkeley where he studies jumping spiders. And so this is a very diverse group of spiders. I think they make up 10% of all spiders on Earth, and they're about the size of a pencil eraser. And so they don't hear sound through air the way humans do. They only sense sound through vibrations in the substrate they're standing on. And so they have sensory organs on their legs. And this is how these spiders can communicate with each other, and they're able to tell things like directionality and get information about the medium that the signal is coming through, and really learn quite a bit about their environment just through vibrations. And they create vibrations themselves by doing different drumming motions or thrumming their abdomens. And so every jumping spider species has a suite of different percussive signals that it makes. And so here on campus in Damien's lab, he has a recording rig set up where they're able to record these spiders. And the way it works is they use a laser vibrometer. And so there's a laser pointed at the surface one of these tiny spiders is standing on, and it can record these very minute vibrations and translate them into wave files so that they're audible for humans. So here's a video that Damien shot in his lab of one of these spiders. That goes on for a very long time. So the first time I saw one of those videos, I was just captivated. This is very cool and deeply weird. And the people working in this lab love studying these animals. And the last thing they want to do is sit in front of a computer and manually label every part of the sound file to denote what signal is being used. But that's what they've had to do for the last few years, and that's how they've made all of the discoveries so far about spider communication, which really contributes most of what we know in this area. And so working with this lab group, I took their annotations from species where they had already characterized all of their communication signals. And this is usually the first step in studying communication in a new species. We want to define every possible signal they could use. We want to build a dictionary. They had already done this, and I was able to fine-tune some of our models so we could apply that to other species that had not yet been seen. And so what we're starting to see is that our models are actually able to get pretty high accuracy when applied to new species. And this means we have potential to scale up and massively accelerate the pace of work. Not just that, but when we think about the broader ecological questions here, this is an incredibly diverse clade. It includes this certain type of spider called peacock spiders, where we just started to understand the genetic relationships between all the species in the family. What we can begin to do once we understand their communication systems is see how the differences in communication map on to the evolutionary differences. And we'll start to get insight into the factors that are shaping communication, which signals are lost or gained over time. Is that because of habitat differences or potential other reasons? So that's why I think this is interesting biologically. Also, is showing that one of our models works on a completely new type of data that wasn't in the training data set, and really a new modality, a different branch of the taxonomic tree. And by eventually adding more signals like this to our training data set, we can start to broaden the amount of species we're able to study. So to step back and return to our conceptual framework, one thing that I mentioned before was we care a lot about multimodal communication. And this The example I just gave was focused on audio only, but really if we want to start to understand meaning, we want to do this mapping between behavioral context and vocal signal. So we began to work on models that would match across these modalities. So this is called biolingual. This is a figure from the paper that was published a few years ago by our research scientist, David Robinson. So this is a language audio model for animal sounds. If you've heard of a clip model, this is very similar. So the way this works is you take audio and paired text, and you run the audio through some encoder, like the one I just described. You run the text through a text encoder, and then you train the model to say what audio goes with what text. And so we're actually teaching the model to compute the vectors or the mappings between these different embedding spaces. So now we're able to compute similarities between different audio files and different text files and do some really nice things, like if we wanted to classify a new audio signal that wasn't in the training data, we can feed it in and see where it falls in the audio space, map over to the text space, and make a pretty good guess at what species it is. So that enables a zero-shot learning. We started to use models like this in an ongoing project studying carrion crows. So for this work, we're collaborating with two professors at the University of Lyon in Spain, who are the two people in the middle of this photo. Jin Yu and Maddie are ESP researchers. And so these professors have been studying this population of crows in Spain for a few decades, so they know a lot about their behavior. And one thing that's really interesting about this population is that they are cooperative. So rather than just two birds forming a mating pair and building a nest and raising chicks, they live in extended family groups where multiple adults will help to raise offspring. So you get in the lower right there, multiple adult birds tending to a single nest, and they're sharing responsibilities for bringing food or defending from predators. And so there's a very high degree of social complexity. And the hypothesis is that there must be very complex communication that is enabling them to coordinate with one another. These birds have been outfitted with very tiny biologgers. They're super lightweight, like coin cell battery driven. And they are recording 3D movement with an accelerometer as well as audio. And so we are developing this multimodal approach and pipeline where we're able to build a workflow for decoding vocalizations by combining those two data streams. And so this is an example project that we're hoping will be an example for others to follow. So this is how it's going so far. So for example, this is what the data stream looks like coming in from two different birds in the community. And we are able to take the audio and extract the movement data from the accelerometers and then create behavioral classes where we can identify things such as flying, brooding, feeding, and then look at our repertoire that we've generated from the audio stream and try to match across classes. So these have been color-coded here. So what we see is that any vocalization that has a pink background only happens when a bird is brooding, or any blue background vocalization only happens during flying. And we're starting to see some patterns, like when birds arrive at the nest, they always give one particular call type, but they only give it if there's a chick present. We're able to start narrowing down and actually get at the underlying meaning by pulling all of this different information together. Another way to visualize this crow data is to think about the different data streams coming in from individual birds. So here, the birds are named with colors in Spanish. So each of these rows is a bird, and every point is a single vocalization that has been color-coded to show the behavioral context. And what we want to do is not just look at what a single bird is doing in a given context, but actually start to look across birds and analyze conversations. And that's where we can start to get at the really interesting part of communication. So the examples I just gave were in these distinct species, and we have a human for scale here. One thing that can happen a lot when doing projects like this is you get a really good workflow that works well for one data set, but isn't generalizable across data or across species. What we need are universal approaches that work for all kinds of animals and all kinds of data. So ESP has been focused on that recently, and out of that has come this new model, NatureLM. This is being presented at iClear this year. And this is a audio language model that is tailored specifically for animal sounds. So this has been trained on billions of parameters, and the training data include human speech, music, environmental data, and also animal sounds. And what we're hoping is that this model will address limitations of previous bioacoustics tools, where, for example, they might have only had a limited range of species they were familiar with, and also hopefully can overcome limitations of LLMs, for example, poor domain knowledge in areas like animal behavior. This was also led by our researcher, David Robinson. So a key part of creating this model was creating a better training data set. There was no getting around this. A lot of animal bioacoustic model training data is mostly just based on the tasks of detection and classification. We added some other tasks here, like text captioning. We also included details about the caller, like how old are they? Is this a juvenile or an adult? Is this a call or a song? So giving much more detail about the call type. And so what we found is that, once again, we're getting task transfer from human audio to animal sounds. And this model is able to do things like count how many different individuals are calling in a data stream, which previously only models designed for humans have been doing. So this is just an example of what the training instances look like. We can give the model commands like caption the audio using the common name for any species present, and there's an expected output in text. So our input is audio plus text, and our output is pure text, and interacting with this is just like typing into ChatGPT. So we can get around needing to code in Python. So I'm going to play a video example first of me using this model. And as an experiment, I fed in an audio file that I found from a citizen science database called Xenocanto. And so what's happening in this audio file is we have a recording of a crow. There are remarks from the recordist where they describe what's happening, and they tell us that there are two crows, two lookouts that are alarming at the approach of passersby. And so we know that these are alarm calls, and we see that the file was recorded in Paris. So here's a video of me uploading that sound to the model and getting response. Tell us what's happening. So let's say caption the audio using common names and describing signal types being used. Call an alarm call of a carrion crow. All right, let's re-add this. Let's see if it can estimate the number of birds calling. All right, that's correct too. Re-add our file here. Let's say, why are the birds alarm calling? Because of a predator. So they likely perceive humans as a predator. That makes sense. Let's try one knows the location, or if it can estimate. So let's say, where might one find this species? Europe. And that's correct. So that's a little bit of interacting with the model. By the way, that last answer, where I asked where that bird might be found, even though the recording was collected in Paris, the model, because it was trained using text, it knows that that species is found across Europe. So it's tapping into that knowledge base to give that answer. That's where that comes from. So here are some of the tasks that demo covered. So this already is very cool. And having studied animal signals for a long time, I'm pretty excited about it. But one of the first things I wanted to do after getting a hold of this model was do some tests where I could try to break it. So the way I did that was pulling in some of my own data from a project that I'm working on where I'm recording soundscapes in Japan. And the reason I thought this would be tricky is that we have massive overrepresentation of North American species in our data sets. So anything found in Japan is probably less likely to be in training data sets. And also, these are soundscapes. Soundscapes are trickier in general, so I didn't know if it would actually be able to tell me anything interesting. So I'll try to run this demo live now too off of our server just to show that it can work. So this is our web interface for interacting with the NatureLM model. So what I'm going to do is drag and drop several recordings that I collected in this soundscape study in Japan. And I'm going to say caption the audio using common names for, or I'll try to make it harder, and describing signal types. And I'm asking for an LLM summary. So I've already composed this before, and I'll process. So while that's running, basically I told the model not just to analyze the files, but also to engage this LLM summary. And I'm telling the LLM, pretend you're an ethology expert and tell me all of these things about the results that the model gives you. So which species are there, what call types are they using, and then some more complicated tasks like which tend to co-occur the most often. Can you guess at the habitat type, or could you predict the number of individuals present? So we scroll down, and here's our output. So we're getting a summary of the different species that were in the audio file, and then this recording where it's taking a guess at where it was, which is East Asia, based on the species present. That makes sense. Some interesting things here are basically, having been to the study site, yes, I know these species were predicted correctly, and I think the inference about co-occurrence is probably as accurate as it could get from this limited data set. One weird thing when I first ran this test is I saw that it detected the sound of an American bullfrog. And at first I was like, well, the models are bound to be wrong sometimes. And then I looked into it a little bit, and it turns out, although the American bullfrog is native to Eastern North America, people love introducing it in other countries. And so this was introduced in Japan about a century ago, and it's actually pretty common at our study site after I started asking collaborators. So there was something even in my own data that I wasn't aware of that this model helped me realize. Okay, and I'll just do one more example with our model while it's up here on the server. And so another common thing that I want to do when I first get data back from the field is just review very long audio files. Sometimes I'll do that by scrolling through manually, but maybe one thing that could accelerate the process would just be running it through a model and it giving me a quick summary of any interesting things that I might want to be aware of. So that's what I'll do now. So I'm going to upload a file that a friend recorded, I believe, in Tennessee, and it's a flock of birds with many different species in it. And I'll just use this task here. So what I'm expecting, given the description from my friend, is that there are a lot of different bird species present. They appear to be foraging together. And some of the questions I have are, who's calling to make the announcement that food is here? What species are responding? What can we infer about how information propagates through a network? Which species are like the sources and the sinks of information? This is like what I'm hoping to get at by doing an acoustic analysis. And so what the model can put out here is timestamps, which species we're calling. So we're getting the species ID, and this is just one task. If I wanted to, I could have asked it to list life stage or things like the kinds of signals that were being used. Okay, that's the live demo of how the model works. I'm glad it worked. And then I guess I was just going to show this video quickly. So one of the things I had thought about for that soundscape study in Japan is we have camera traps set up around the study site, but they only record a few seconds of video every day. And one of the things I'm hoping to do is take these snippets of video like this, where these raccoon dogs, these tanuki walk through, and see if the birds in the area are talking about them. And so that's one of the hypotheses I'm hoping to test with this data set. This paper describing NatureLM, it's up on arXiv. It'll be presented at ICLR. And So what we're showing is that it's able to detect and classify many different species. And one of the cool emergent properties is that it seems to be capable of zero-shot learning. So this model has successfully been able to ID species that were not in the training data set. And so we did this with ablation tests where we completely removed species from training data. And then when doing classification, the model was given multiple choice options. And what's happening is that species that are closely related sound very similar. And we have these binomial species names like Homo sapiens. So even if you could just guess the genus, then it's possible for the model to approximate the species a lot of the time. So about 20% of the time, it was able to guess a species without it having even been in the training data set. So that was very exciting as well. All right, so to sum up, this is our approach to studying animal communication. We're assuming that these models will be improved upon over time. This will be an iterative process where we keep applying them to these decode projects and hopefully get feedback and continue improving them. One thing I wanted to highlight is that our organization is creating a theory of change. Today, I only talked about the middle part here, where we're researching and decoding animal communication, but this is just part of our larger mission to try to build up this field and eventually create cultural change in humans, where we're shifting people's mindsets. One thing I don't have time to talk about a lot today, but I want to acknowledge is that there are a lot of ethical considerations that we discuss very frequently at ESP, and we have been developing a plan for creating guidelines of use and implementing guardrails when releasing models. And so that is something we are actively working on right now. But that's all. So I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sara, for such an illuminating presentation about how we're using frontier models to decode animal behavior and communication. From Peter, is the model open source?
NatureLM is not yet open source. We are planning for it to be. The reason we're going slow is we want to think really carefully about safe usage and to be thoughtful about, for example, things like if there's an endangered species that can be detectable using this model. Other citizen science apps like eBird will often hide the location of a species like that so that people don't show up and accidentally harass the individual. There are a few cases like that that we need to think through, so it's not yet widely available.
All right, another question. Before testing, how confident were you that the model trained on human language would generalize to animal vocalizations? And any reflections on what that implies about animal language?
I think I was confident that it would transfer to signals that we're somewhat able to discriminate with our own ears. I was surprised by how well it has done on things like the spider signals that are largely percussive or just atonal signals. I think it does say something about, at least for communication that we define as meaningful, the way we're able to break it down into meaningful syllables or acoustic units. The fact that we can use that approach across species does say that there is some universality in communication and how information is transferred. I wouldn't necessarily speculate farther than that, though. I think I want to be careful with my language. I also want to acknowledge that other species encode information in ways that probably won't make sense to us for a long time, even using these types of models. Just taking that naming convention example, to think about imitating another person's voice makes sense when we're using the dolphins as an analogy, but the way the elephants name each other, I think researchers don't even fully understand yet. It's just a way of adjusting your voice when you're saying a word. So we have a lot of inherent differences.
Can the model infer effective valence states from audio recordings?
So we're able to somewhat get at that. So for example, if we know an alarm call indicates some level of stress, we can state that using the model. We have been working with some researchers who are able to find signals of stress in vocalizations that show up as what they call these nonlinear phenomenon in the signals. It would be possible to add that to our model and detect it. That's not a part of it right now.
Do you think this will have implications for how we think about language in general?
I think there's a really interesting conversation about whether other animals, other species have languages, and I was really resistant to the fact or the idea that they might for a long time. And I'm even warming up to it, just having seen more and more examples of like combinatoriality or syntax in other species. So I think that our work is going to persuade more people that other species do have language.
I've heard that birdsong has a complexity in notes, range, and modulation. Has your research revealed insights to help us better understand birdsong?
I guess what our research has started to reveal is that we can find differences in populations just by doing similarity analyses. So there is a convergence upon shared signal structure, usually in animals that live closer together. So our work is supporting that. We're also finding some evidence in the crows that a lot of meaning is encoded in amplitude. So the same signal made loudly or softly appear to have different meanings and only show up in distinct contexts. And that's something I haven't seen reported before in some birdsong studies.
Wow, so it's like a novel insight. That's
Think
really
so.
cool. Why not work with dogs where we already understand a lot of the sounds and body language?
Great question. I don't think we're opposed to working with dogs. The collaborators that we have now are really focused on wild populations, and I think that's our goal, just in that we're really trying to support conservation efforts, and so that's where we can make the most of a difference, studying wild animals.
I think this might be our final question. So you've identified sounds for predators and food. What else? How deep does communication go?
A really coarse way to divide up animal communication might be signals about mating, signals about food, danger, and then social signals. And I think it's really funny that we have this category called social signals when it's probably the majority of communication in social species. I think it goes really deep. I think that when a bird is singing and it's like in its habitat, it probably recognizes the voices of every other bird that it can hear. Like there is extensive individual recognition, species level recognition, and like maintenance of social network structure as a cognitive representation in individuals' heads. And so, yeah, to navigate that kind of social landscape, I think there's pretty sophisticated communication. I think there's probably some kind of tenses being used or a way to refer to previous or future events, as well as all kinds of information about individual characteristics encoded in vocal signals. So I think we're starting to get hints of this. I believe it was orangutans. There was some evidence of a past tense, but as more and more research accumulates, I think we're going to find a lot of support.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sarah. Please give a warm round of applause.